Freshly Baked NYC isn't just a dispensary, it's a Bronx institution. Right on Arthur Avenue in the heart of Bronx's Little Italy, Freshly Baked NYC delivers the goods you're looking for with a local touch. 80% of their staff are born and raised in the Bronx, and this spot is proudly minority and woman owned. They know the culture, the hustle, and the community because they are the community. When you shop Freshly Baked NYC, you're supporting your neighbors. Swing by or take advantage of their expanded delivery across the Bronx. Quality, legal products, fair prices, no hassle. Freshly Baked NYC. Get baked in the Bronx. Check them out in store or online at freshlybaked.nyc. I'm Loki Karuna, and this is TRILLOQUY. Thanks so much for tuning in, and thanks again to the folks up at Freshly Baked for their support. I've supported the cannabis industry more than my fair share, I'll say, in many ways, so it feels good to see some of the karma coming back. Definitely check them out up in the Bronx if you are here in New York. Well, I'm going to speak on the Luigi Mangione situation in today's TRILLOQUY, so that's coming up a little later. But today's feature is my conversation with the one and only Adolphus Hailstork. I'm grateful to each and every person who's ever come onto the TRILLOQUY podcast, but having the opportunity to chat with Mr. Hailstork is certainly a standout for me. So shout out and thank you to everyone who made this one possible. For those of you who might not be familiar with Adolphus, he's one of the preeminent composers of our time. I'll say he's a black man whose catalog features music that celebrates the diaspora, and he's a composer whose music highlights the general overall skill that he's been bringing to the field for decades now. One of his recent accolades was the American premiere of a work that he called Ndemara. It's a work that was written about a star from the perspective of folks living on the African continent. You know, cosmology and, you know, all things celestial don't just belong to Western culture. And that's sort of the thing that Adolphus is speaking to in that piece. He'll say more about that in our chat, in addition to just talking about himself, his process, and offering words to folks trying to do the composition thing for themselves today. So once again, an honor to have him on the show and to be able to feature him on this 247th opus of the TRILLOQUY podcast. To get us into my chat with Adolphus Hailstork, we're going to sample one of his previously written works. This is the tail end of movement 3 of his 3 orchestral spirituals, Oh Freedom. Hope you enjoy his take on this Black classic and hope you enjoy my chat with him. More on the other side.
Well, I had the same experience. I never heard of Black composers when I was young. Now, remember, there's a huge age gap here, and I was coming along in the 50s, 1950s and 60s, and Black composers were almost never mentioned, performed, or anything else. Yeah.
Well, and I did read that you had the opportunity to study with a man named Mark Fax. I wonder if what do you remember about your engagements with Mr. Fax?
A gentle and very talented person. I liked him a lot.
Wow. So hopefully this maybe changed or at least just put a different spin on this idea of composition for you, especially mentioning that you too had not studied or heard of Black composers in your upbringing.
Oh, well, I never believed that a Black person had to have a Black preceding him. I had already consumed greatly many of the great white European composers. So the fact that Mark came along, that I studied with Mark, was a great opportunity. But uh, at my time that I came along, the concept of the capital letter B, black, was not the essential ingredient of my thinking.
Hmm.
Or, you know, it wasn't the black uprising mostly came after I came out of college. I was not aware of it. Let me put it that way. I grew up in the North. I didn't grow up in segregation. I didn't grow up in a black community kind of thing. So, the to me, composers are white, and I didn't give a damn. You know, it was as simple as that. It never occurred to me to consider it as a valuable thing, whether someone was black or white.
Mm. And you did mention growing up in the North. We actually had the opportunity to briefly meet after a Gateways Festival performance
Oh, okay.
some
Uh-huh.
years ago. I what considering the difference in the general conversation that you're identifying between the North and the South, I wonder what your views are on the significance of something like Gateways in the town that you grew up in.
I guess it's significant because it's still around and it's growing. It's good that it's happened, and I hope it continues. They need to maybe go on the road and make their presence known in other places in the country. But Rochester's a great musical city, as we know.
The piece of music that was performed on that concert was your American Port of Call. And so much of the music, especially the orchestral music that you've written, is themed around America, much of it around Black America. We've already talked a little bit about how, that capital B, Black, was not a part of your musical training, but Blackness, generally speaking, even Americanness, does seem to have a vital place in the ingredients you put into the pot, so to speak, when you're coming up with an orchestral work. I wonder if you can speak to that.
Yeah, in some pieces, you're absolutely right. Now, my involvement in the concept of black and black history began when I was working on my doctorate. I had grown up totally in an acculturated white uh, influenced culture, and I did not was not aware of and had not experienced the problems of being an African American in the South. And I was very fortunate, I think, to have grown up in northern part of New York State, uh, because I don't think I would have even had the opportunities I had in high school to write my first orchestra pieces had I been born, raised, and schooled in the South. So that's my history, my particular history. That doesn't mean to undercut anyone who came out of the Southern uh, culture in any way, but my experience was a little late, you might say. But I felt after I grew up actually during or came of age during the Black Revolution of the '60s and the time of Martin Luther King, et cetera, et cetera. And when I found out that some kids I'd gone to school with in Howard University at that very time when I was in school, were going downtown to Washington and sitting at counters there and raising a little hell. I said, well, what can I do to contribute?
Hmm.
That is where I got into, well, maybe I can write a piece that reflects the triumphs of being an African American in this country and the tragedies of being an African American in this country. And so that's what I thought a black composer could do. I didn't, but I don't mean that a black composer should do it all the time, but could do it. And that's what I chose to do in some pieces.
You mentioned Martin Luther King Jr., growing up in Memphis, stories of, his work and his murder are very much front and center. So there's so much that we learned about growing up, that I learned about growing up. But other discoveries that came along, in a similar way that you mentioned about some discoveries coming as you were working on your PhD. I think beyond music, are there other stories or other things that just pop into your mind as far as what these discoveries meant for you? You know, what culture beyond music and beyond Black music you were able to engage as you were working on your doctorate?
Well, Black history fascinates me. It's one of the great histories of the world, and I do believe that it needs and needed. Maybe it's already been accomplished. More attention, more uh, whatever placement in American culture in general. It's a very great thing, and I don't mean just the culture of the South, although much of that, with terms of slavery, segregation, and all of that, um, certainly is going to get a lot of attention. It's interesting that you're asking this question. I was just reading. New York Times, Sunday New York Times, yesterday, and there was an article in there in the opinion section about we don't need to call Egypt our home anymore, our
Hmm.
cultural home, and that we need to look in sub-Saharan Africa to the great kingdoms that were there and give credit to them for who we are as a people, uh, that were not Egyptian. Although I had traveled to Egypt, and Egyptians did say consider themselves African
Hmm.
because they are part of the North African continent, and the so it's a complex story that will continue for hundreds of years, I think, because uh, it's the making of America, and it's got to it needs attention.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because coming up this month here in New York, you'll have I understand that you'll have the U.S. premiere of a work titled Ndemara, which is a very star themed work. And the more I read about the work, the more I fell in love with it because we love to center sort of Western philosophy or Western science when we are thinking about the stars and celestial things. But you do something completely different with this work.
Well, I had not realized until I started reading up on the subject that every single culture has its own way of interpreting the stars. It's not all just, well, whatever they said in Western science, that's the name of the star, and that's the way it should be. Every different culture, every single tribe could have their own interpretation of how the stars are put together. And with this one piece, well, looking for this one star, um, well, they asked me if I'd write something about African astronomy and how that might work in with a composition. And I looked up that and saw this one that sounded absolutely beautiful to me. The particular star that shone very brightly around 4 o'clock in the morning, I think, uh, in some parts of over African continent, that warned the boyfriends or girlfriends that they need to break up for the night and get back home before their parents discovered they had been out all night. And I thought that was enchanting. And that was how this piece came about.
Oh, that's beautiful. Were you able to attend the world premiere of the work?
Yes, I was in Paris. And would you believe it or not? They invited me to Paris, and I heard the world premiere there. And then a month or so later, they did it in Milan, the same orchestra. And so I got a nice tour of Western Europe on the way because my wife and I, we started in Paris, so we love Paris. And then we spent some time in Spain, and and then we went on down to Italy, and so it was a grand tour. It was one of my favorite memories.
Oh, that's phenomenal. You know, I work a lot with composers with new music readings. And, when they finally sit in front of these orchestras, sometimes for the very first time, they seem so overwhelmed that when it comes time for them to offer comments based on questions from the conductor or other
Uh-huh.
musicians, they aren't sure where to start. I wonder, considering where you are in your compositional career, when you're hearing a piece of music of yours come to life in that way for the first time, what are you listening for? How do you engage those first readings?
Well, that's a very, very good question. The two things you listen for as a composer, make sure you get there for the first rehearsal so you can help with the technical details and questions. And the second thing, you want to get a sense of if the piece is working. Um, I uh, with the onset of or the invention of a lot of electronic equipment, you can get a very good sense of the overall piece and if it's flowing well, et cetera, et cetera. The thing that might be a surprise, even using electronic equipment, is when you get it in front of human beings, does it work technically? And can you hear things that you thought you could hear? You can always make your computer lie to you, and and make sure that the second clarinet part was louder than when you hear it live and they say, "Gee, I thought it was louder than that," and because you had tweaked the dials on your computer to make that thing happen like that, you can be really surprised. Uh, Lately, I don't get surprised that much because um, I can hear inside of the orchestra or inside the performer, and and uh, and listen for the inner details as well as the overall uh, uh, eventual uh, gestalt, you might say.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, clarinet players don't have volume knobs quite in the same way that
Right,
computers do.
right, right.
Well, and one of the things I find so fascinating about this upcoming US premiere is that it will be a student premiere, that, so many students will get an opportunity to play music by a Black composer that didn't. Again, I'm thinking about myself. So with that in mind, I'm thinking about the fact that some students will come to this thinking about the celestial aspects. If I were in that orchestra, I really would be focused in on the Afrocentricity that's present. Is there any way that you would encourage or even ask a student to engage this piece of music?
Ah, that's interesting. I don't think I well, it's, hmm, I didn't go about it with a deliberate, how can I get a sense of Africa in this? I did not do that. What I did do is go about how can I get a sense of a boyfriend and a girlfriend,
Mm.
um, uh, and so it's a very universal theme that when you stop to think, the kids sneaking off in the middle of the night to be together, and hopefully their parents don't know about it, and then they're warned by something they see in the celestial sphere that it might be time to go home, kids. That fascinated me. That fascinated me more than, well, how can I make it sound more African? I didn't do that because first of all, it's limited to two oboes and two French horns and strings, and although that's not really a great limitation, it's you don't get. I wasn't asked to add drums and get an African flavor in it. That's not what I set out to do.
Yeah, I love that you just mentioned how that sort of orchestration doesn't have to be limiting or isn't so limiting. Again, many of the composers I work with, if it's not, four horns, if it isn't timpani plus four percussion, that they aren't sure what to do. I wonder if you can speak to how you engage just really juicing creativity around what many would consider limited orchestration, limited forces.
Well, it's not limited if you have your strings. First of all, the foundation of the orchestra is the strings. And if I've got my strings and then I can add coloring in the oboes and the French horn, I'm fine with that. It's uh, basically a string piece with two sets of winds added.
I mentioned a little bit earlier your bassoon set that I had the great opportunity of being exposed to as an undergraduate. You have lots of other solo works, chamber music. Do you engage writing for small forces? I'll use that phrase differently than orchestral. Is it more similar than not? How do you engage those two differences?
Well, I write everything from a single flute piece all the way up to full symphony orchestra with chorus. So it's it's just make the music. Now we got to think about a lot of things there. Great questions again, and that is first of all you have structure, and you have evolution of the piece, and then you have sound. Say some people might start with sound first, and I have at times, but uh, I think one of the reasons I've been a little successful is that I also am very conversant with the ideas of good structure and shape. So uh, all of that works together. So the momentum of the piece, the shape of the piece in terms of its tension levels, and then the development or the sonics of the piece, all of those are part of writing.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. But before I, begin to wrap up with some closing questions, I did want to circle back to this idea of universality. The universality of young love, of those sorts of things. I'm sure you never snuck out of the house as a kid, perfectly well behaved, but
Not my day. No.
but as far as universality of theme is concerned, I think that's really phenomenal to integrate into a musical form or a musical experience that may not seem universal to many people. I wonder how you think about this as you continue to compose, especially considering everything you've seen in your career so far. Is the orchestra specifically something that we can consider universal in some way? Is the orchestral experience something that needs to drastically change for it to actually be a universal experience? How do you think about that?
Well, I have a great passion for the symphony orchestra, so it would make my heart happy to have symphony. I think actually it has happened that all around the world people know the Western Symphony Orchestra and love it. Whether I mean I'm amused or no, I'm not amused really. I'm aware of the fabulous love affair, for instance, that Japanese orchestras have with Western culture. And I mean, there are Japanese orchestras devoted to the music of Bach. And I said, what? And that shows his universality. And I've traveled to China many times with my Chinese wife, and I have heard fantastic Western orchestra pieces performed there. A performance of the Bruckner Fourth Symphony in Shanghai, for instance, was astounding. So um, everybody knows it's a great tool, that the symphony orchestras, and I'm happy about that. As for my piece, you just made me think of something. The piece is a love song.
Mm,
It's a love song. So we're talking about uh, a, a guy and a girl coupling that um, is warm hearted and at the same time ethereal in terms of its being out in the open and uh, uh, under the stars, and that is what I was trying to capture, and I think I did. I love the piece, and I think it works. You know.
We're all looking forward to the U.S. premiere. I have to ask you this based on what you just shared. We talked about earlier how a composer can utilize compositional technique to speak to Black history, Black achievement, these sorts of things. That's not necessarily an obligation. I wonder how you think about that when it comes to themes of love. If I just turn on the radio and listen to popular music, most of the tunes I'm going to listen to are about love in one way or another, however we want to define that word love. There is a lot of love music in Western classical repertoire, but it doesn't feel like it's at the center in the same way. I wonder what your thoughts are on engaging just general subject matter as a composer that broad audiences can connect to in that way.
Well, everybody likes the subject, so so it's uh, I I can't relate that much to today's love music. When I was coming along in the 50s and 60s, et cetera, et cetera, I'm a ballad guy. I like songs, real songs, not chanting, not spouting off um, a, a set of words.
Mm-hmm.
A I came up on a lyrical tradition. I love lyrical music, and that's what I wanted to get. I wanted to mix lyricism with starlight. That's what lyricism and starlight and passion.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for that. Well, is there anything on your writing desk or on your computer now that you're working on, maybe finishing up for an upcoming premiere?
Uh, no, well, no, I'm kind of in a state of hiatus right now. The I finished a whole bunch of work on the past 4 or 5 years, and I'm just revising some things and uh, tweaking some ideas to make another piece. They're getting ready in '86 to have a. My wife wants to have a big hailstork bash here in the Norfolk area, Norfolk, Virginia area, and um, I want to have a new piece ready for that. It would be for my 85th birthday, and I'm just tweaking with ideas, but nothing's inflamed me at this moment. Although I just did finish four serenades for viola and harp, which I think are really pretty. I wrote them for a fabulous violist in Boston, and uh, 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 what's her name? Gordon, and she Ashley Gordon. She
Oh, of course.
founded a program called uh, Castle of Our Skins, and I was a guest of theirs a year or so ago. And they do wonderful work, and she plays gorgeously. So that that's been my latest passionate encounter with music, and now I'm just relaxing and getting ready for my next one.
Wonderful. Well, we'll stand by. I'll also mention that the man who introduced me to your bassoon set, Loki in Washington, is also
Oh yeah,
in the Boston area. So
yes he is. All
lots
right.
of great stuff happening in Boston for sure.
Yeah, I love it. I have a freaky experience coming up. Well, I just had one. MIT did a piece of mine called "The World Called" on a text by Rita Dove. Testimonials, the name of the poem. But the same piece is going to be done in New York City um, in April, and Rita will be there. That I just found out, and that's very good. But Boston area has been very great. And of course, New York City is New York City. So.
Indeed, indeed. Well, I wanted to wrap up by giving you space to offer a word or two to today's so-called emerging composers. Again, I spend so much time working with with these composers. And, so many of the questions are the same. Well, how do I get that first orchestral commission? Or how do I get this work in front of the artistic directors of this orchestra? I wonder just what general words of advice, or maybe even words of caution, you would offer to composers who are really, beating the block these days, trying to carve out that career for themselves.
First of all, in this day and age, it's actually easier because uh, you need to set up your own web page so that people can consult what you've done and hear a snippet of it. And you need to always ask for a recording whenever you have a piece played. Ask them for an archival recording so that you can share it with others, um, and let people hear what you're doing. That's all there is to it. And then eventually, word of mouth works a lot in this business. And somebody's heard of you and mentions you to somebody else, and uh, I think the criteria is not the color of your skin, but the size of your craft.
Mm.
A good craft, and you're making a sound statement, sound being a double entendre, then you could perhaps make an impact. Remember, there is an audience out there, and and today's orchestras and artistic directors and conductors are looking for solid material that is challenging as well as not totally off-putting.
Shout out to my teacher, Loki in Washington, my first bassoon teacher, for that masterful recording of Adolphus Hailstork's bassoon set, the tail end of it there. Loki was actually the first person to say the name Adolphus Hailstork to me, in addition to the names of several other Black composers. So it's always important to note the power of the individual to set in motion a trajectory for a person that they may not have even thought about otherwise. So shout out and thanks to Loki in Washington for the role that he's played in my awareness of Adolphus Hailstork. And of course, huge thanks and congratulations to Mr. Adolphus Hailstork for the impact he's had on the field and for joining me here on the TRILLOQUY podcast. A true, true honor. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to address the news surrounding Luigi Mangione. And before I jump in, I want to remind everyone that as a practitioner of Nichiren Buddhism, I recognize and honor the inherent Buddha nature of all living beings. And that includes the late Brian Thompson, who Luigi allegedly shot a couple of weeks ago. I'll also remind everyone that as someone who spends a lot of time reading the writings of Black leaders from decades past, namely members of the Black Panther Party and folks like Malcolm X, Jawanza Kunjufu, and others, I understand that violence takes many shapes. This is something that Johann Galtung also spoke on. If you're unfamiliar with his work, I'll have a link in the description. Well, all of that to say what Luigi did was violent, yes. And what Brian Thompson perpetuated through his work in the medical industry was violent on a larger scale. Specifically, medical insurance was violent on a larger scale. This is not by any means me justifying murder. I hope that you can understand that. It's me making clear that the violence inflicted on all marginalized people by the hand of the insurance industry is something we have to recognize and understand as the cause for this tragedy to the Thompson family. Not derangement, not mental health, not just some general crime problem. This is a direct result of the violence of United Health. It's getting harder and harder to find Luigi Mangione's manifesto, but I have a link to a copy of it in the description of this opus if you want to take a look. I'm actually going to read a short excerpt from it now that resonated with me. Luigi writes here, "People are dying. Evil has become institutionalized. Corporations make billions of dollars off the pain, suffering, death, and anguished cries in the night of millions of Americans. We enter into an agreement for health care with a legally binding contract that promised care commensurate with our insurance payments and medical needs. Then United Healthcare changes the rules to suit their own profits. They think they make the rules and think that because it's legal, that no one can punish them. They think there's no one out there who will stop them. So again, if you want to read the whole thing for context, there's a link in the description. But what I hope we all learn from this news is, number one, the media will always protect the capital class. People are murdered every day, but this murder got disproportionate attention, right? And I'll repeat myself, this man didn't deserve to be murdered. He only experienced the effects of the causes that were made by the company he was leading. But it is important to note the attention that this is getting. Number two, there are people who will risk it all for vengeance. We aren't living in a society where no one will do something. I even read a couple days ago about other arrests that have been made in other parts of the country from people making threats to their insurance officers. Not saying this is okay, but it is a testament to the degree to which people are fed up with this type of oppression. And number three, the people have spoken. I don't know what your social media timeline looks like, but I'm reading far more support for Luigi than I am the insurance workers and the insurance companies. We, and I include myself in this, we are being oppressed by a medical industry that foregrounds profit over human health. Luigi may have been a lone actor in this specific case, but he certainly isn't alone in spirit. I think there are a few ways to connect this to the arts, but the connection that I'll highlight before signing off here is capitalism's hold on the arts in the United States, just how it has a hold on the medical field through insurance agencies and those sorts of things, big pharma, all of that. Just like insurance companies, arts organizations have to make money because they have to pay people. It's good for arts organizations to support certain communities or to quote unquote engage audiences in whatever way they are. But all of that will go right out of the window if it doesn't lead to some sort of profit for the organization, whether it be directly from the consumers or by granting organizations and different foundations, these institutions that keep the nonprofit sector running financially. It's time for us to really consider the power of our capitalist structure and what it has hanging over all of our heads and the violence of all types that will continue to thrive if we don't actively challenge it in whatever way we can. I'm working with a couple of arts organizations that are trying to engage this dialogue and as it manifests in the patriarchy and racism and all sorts of things. Shout out to the American Composers Forum and to Decolonizing the Music Room, two that I'll name right now. And I hope that your organization can begin to think about this too, if it isn't already. Violence isn't just direct. Brian Thompson experienced direct violence, but there's also cultural violence and systemic violence. And I think that systemic violence is what Luigi Mangione was responding to. There's systemic violences, maybe not in the same way or in the same degree, but there are certainly systemic violences and definitely cultural violence that thrive in the arts in our world. Let's work on our healing so that we can get to some sort of peace led by the arts, direct peace, cultural peace, and most importantly, systemic peace. Happy holidays. Hope you'll stay safe out there if you're traveling over the next few weeks. And I'll talk to you again soon. Nam Yoho Renge Kyo. Peace.